Hello, everyone. I'm Allan Tate, the Executive Chair of the MIT Sloan CIO Symposium, and I want to welcome you to episode 1 of our new online series that we are rolling out this year in 2025. But before we begin, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, please save the date. The next CIO Symposium, which will be at the Royal Sonesta in Cambridge, right near the MIT campus, will be May 20, 2025. We will have an exclusive pre-event for VIPs on the 19th, similar to what we did last year. Now, our online community for 2025 is changing. We now have 3 tiers. The first is a member, which we've always had. Anyone can join and become a member of our community. But we've also introduced a friends plan. That tier gives you access to the community and some read-write material. It's free, but it is gated. This is to make sure that you're part of the IT community and not, for example, a spammer. Finally, we'll have an innovator tier. This will be for paid subscribers. This tier will give you access to discounted tickets to the symposium. It will also give you access to the pre-event, and it will also give you access to online events that we're going to have all year round. We're going to continue the conversation all year, and eventually, we'll be doing this in front of a live audience, but today we're recording, just myself and my colleague, Irving Wladawsky-Berger, but eventually you'll be invited to join us at these online events. So with that, let me introduce Irving Wladawsky-Berger, who is my content and panelist advisor for the CIO Symposium. And he's going to be joining me for the first series of events that we do, which will be where we will get together and discuss his blog. He does a lot of research on IT topics and AI topics, and we'll be talking about them and give you a chance to join the conversation. We'll be introducing other types of content as we go, but this is where we're starting. So Irving, why don't you say hello and tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Well, Allan, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with you doing the very first of our podcasts, of our discussions. As you said, my name is Irving Wladawsky-Berger. I am both, I would say, a technologist, a computer scientist, and then I'm very interested in the impact of technologies in the marketplace, in the world of business. I spent the bulk of my career at IBM. I joined IBM in 1970 as a computer scientist in the research laboratories. And over time, I started to gravitate less on the research on the technology itself and more on the impact of the technology on the world of business, on economies. So those are, I care about the technology, not just on how it's getting developed, but what kind of impact it's going to have. And for example, in the 1990s, I was very involved in parallel supercomputing. I was very involved in organizing and leading IBM's internet strategy, and then IBM's Linux and open source strategy. I retired from IBM in 2007, and I've been affiliated with MIT as a research affiliate in the Sloan School of Management since roughly 2008. And ever since then, I've been involved with the MIT CIO Symposium for at least 10 years in various capacities. And it's one of my favorite activities of the year, working now with Allan in helping to organize and then participate in the symposium as appropriate.
Yeah, well, I must say, I very much enjoy working with you, and we have a lot of fun every year. So, this discussion is going to be about a particular post you put in the blog, and I just want everybody to know if you join our Friends plan, Irving's blog posts are copied into what we call the public square, so you can read them. The one that we're talking about today is called Artificial Intelligence, Realistic Expectations versus Irrational Exuberance. And it's based on the closing keynote last year that was given by Rodney Brooks, who's a very well-known guy. But Irving, do you want to say a few words about Rodney just to orient people to who we're talking about here?
Yeah, let me first say a word about my blog. As I was getting ready to transition from my full-time job in the world of business to my what I think of as my post full-time job in the world more of academia, I started to write a weekly blog in 2005, and I've been doing that ever since. And it's a very good way of keeping track of what's going on in the world of technology and business strategy. Now, um, uh, when Allan and I were talking about who would be the right person to give the closing keynote at the 2024 CIO Symposium, which took place in May of 2024, we quickly focused on Rodney Brooks, uh, who has been doing a lot of very interesting research in AI and robotics for quite a while. Rodney is presently a professor emeritus at MIT. He was director of the MIT AI lab from 1997 to 2003 and was the founding director of the Computer Sciences and Artificial Intelligence Lab, CCEL, is what we call it, in 2003 and remained its director until 2007. Rodney is also a very well-known entrepreneur in the area of robotics. He has founded a number of companies, iRobot, for example, which is very well known because iRobot developed the Roomba, this very fascinating way of cleaning a rug or cleaning the floors that uses relatively simple AI technology. You just get it going and it continues. But he also has developed robots that can go into areas where it's too dangerous for humans to go, like when there was the Fukushima reactor got overturned by a huge wave in Japan several years ago. They used his robots to go into the reactor because a human, it was very radioactive, and those kinds of robots were controlled by people, but they were almost like intelligent mini tanks. They were able, unlike the Roomba, which only works on a flat floor, those robots could climb, could go to different places. And more recently, he's developed new companies, Rethink Robotics, and his latest company is Robust AI. So in the field of AI and robotics, we felt there is nobody better than Rodney to be our keynote speaker at the end of the symposium. And we were really lucky that we were able to get him to do so.
Yeah, and I'll just add a couple of things. First of all, besides being brilliant, he's also a super nice guy. He came, he did the closing, he stayed late, talked to everybody who came to the reception. He was there, I think, until like 9 o'clock. So it was a pleasure and a privilege to be able to talk to him for all that time. I'm actually a Rumba owner myself. And
Mhm.
one of the things using it reminds me of, if you go back to his closing keynote, he talks about how he always wants to make the robot work well with humans, So he talks about if he has a robot in a factory floor, puts a handle on it so that if it gets in the way, the humans can just shove it out of the way. With the Rumba, if it's having difficulty getting over the rug or gets stuck with dog hair, I just pick it up, clean it out, put it back down, and it goes back and does its business. So very practical robotic applications.
Right.
So, okay. So the next thing I wanted to ask you about, Irving, is AI history. And this is
Mm.
something that, Rodney talked about in his presentation, within the context of, AI's been like on the verge of being really exciting, like since 1959.
Yeah, actually, uh, Rod started his keynote by reminding us that AI was founded as an academic discipline at a meeting in Dartmouth University with a number of professors, quite a number of them were from MIT and other places, in 1956. That was almost at the onset of computers and computer sciences. And the field's founders, they were so excited about computers. Computers really became more used during World War II for ballistic calculations and so on. And of course, the technology kept improving. But in the mid 50s, it was still not a big use. They weren't widely used in commercial applications like they became in the 60s and 70s with mainframes and supercomputers. But what they believed is that they just about every aspect of human intelligence could, in principle, be precisely expressed in software and executed in increasingly powerful computers. And they were so excited about software, which in those days was just beginning to appear. And they were so excited about advances in computers, they thought, I don't know, in 10, 20 years, we'll have intelligent machines and doing just about everything a human can do. Well, we know in retrospect that they were, how can I say it, incredibly ambitious in their predictions, but incredibly ambitious. In fact, I would say that uh, even today, if you said to me, well, Irving, an AI system can do just about everything a human could do, I would say not so fast. So that's something we can discuss later, the limits of AI. But in the 60s and 70s, artificial intelligence became one of the most exciting areas of computer sciences. And MIT had a major effort in computer sciences, Stanford University, a number of top universities around the world started developing more and more computer sciences programs, and that was true in research labs. In fact, as I said, I joined IBM Research in 1970. My first job as a manager was as a first level manager in 1974 of a small group that was doing research in artificial intelligence applications like natural language understanding and things like that. So it goes back there. And in those days, I also got quite a bit involved with some of the people in MIT that were doing very advanced research. But as we said, the pioneers of computer sciences bit off way more than they could chew. And the excitement was huge. The hype was huge. The results were very, very small. And so after, I would say, a couple of decades of hype and a couple of decades of disappointing results, AI went into what became known as an AI winter, meaning that the support by governments like, the Department of Defense and the NSF, and in the UK, the equivalent institutions pretty much stopped. And in the 1980s, AI went through another AI winter. There was new initiatives in areas like expert systems and so on, which were a little bit different than previous ones, but they too didn't go anywhere. And people were wondering, so what will be the future of AI? Now, but then AI got reinvented in the 1990s in a totally different way, totally different paradigm. Instead of trying to program intelligence, and by the way, if you ask me, why is it so difficult to program intelligence? Well, because we don't know what it is. We don't know how we do it. If you say, Irving, why don't you program how you know how to drive from here to there? How do you do directions? The answer is, well, I know how to follow directions and I know how to look around and decide what to do, but that doesn't mean I can program it. If you ask me a simple question like, Irving, can you recognize the difference between a cat and a dog? The answer is, of course, I can recognize that. In fact, Allan, I would expect that your little grandchild would be very close to be able to tell the difference between a cat and a dog, but we don't know how to program that in. But the new paradigm, that is what we're now using in AI, is that instead of trying to program intelligence, we train AI algorithms by using huge amounts of data and pretty much asking the algorithm to learn by itself the key characteristics that differentiate a cat from a dog, from a giraffe, from a leopard, from a tomato, from an apple, etc. If one of the most exciting major challenges of AI was to try to teach it to play chess against human champions. And finally, in the late 1990s, an IBM supercomputer called Deep Blue was able to defeat in a chess match the then reigning champion of chess, Garry Kasparov. And the way the people in IBM research trained the supercomputer is by giving it lots and lots and lots of histories of chess games from many, many, many years. And at any point, the algorithms in Deep Blue were able to analyze, well, which of the moves that I could make now in the past have had the highest probability of winning. So it was learning not because of it being programmed, but by analyzing the historical data of chess games. Something similar happened about, I would say, 15 to 20 years later. Well, all of a sudden, people were able to teach an AI algorithm, DeepMind, how to play championship level Go, the game of Go, which is much more complicated than chess because there are so many more moves. And again, it was trained by giving it access to huge amounts of data about historical Go games. And then based on that data, it was able to quote unquote train itself and then translate that training into the right algorithms. So now every time it had to make a move, it could go ahead and do it. And then we call that machine learning. And we call the more sophisticated aspects of machine learning deep learning. And most recently, we've had what's called generative AI, which is where we've developed large language models and like ChatGPT, which are able to, you can interact with them using natural language. They can respond in natural language. And Allan, I believe you've used ChatGPT quite a bit recently, correct?
I have, and I'll talk about that in a second, but I just want to add a little personal experience that I have to add to some of the stories that you're talking about. First of all, with chess. So it's interesting. I was a chess player when I was younger, so I was very excited when this computer finally won at chess. But one of the things that I remember is back then, you probably remember this too, is that there was a lot of talk about humans and machines working together to play chess. And at that time, a human-machine combination could actually play a stronger game than either a human or machine separately. That's not true anymore. The AI has become so powerful at chess, the human just gets in the way. So the game has changed a little bit. The other thing is that back when the computers won at chess, I was at Schneider Electric, and one of my colleagues was there and said, "Oh, Allan, this is really good, but computers will never win at Go." Well, you just told us that, in fact, years later, the computers did win at Go, although there was a little blip in that I think has been overcome. The original program, some humans figured out how to beat the original program, and then they went and improved. And of course, now the Go computers are really good. But the other story I wanted to tell you, and this I think will relate to the 7 deadly sins that we're going to get to later, was, back in the 1980s, I was a student at MIT, but I was being funded by Draper Laboratory. I was what they called the Draper Fellow, and I was in the robotics lab. And so we were doing robotics, and, at that time, most of the algorithms that we were developing were, optimization type algorithms.
What year was that?
This, I think it was 1986.
Was Rodney there already, or Rod Brooks?
I don't recall him.
Okay.
I worked a lot with a guy named Dan Whitney.
Yeah, okay.
But in any case, so, at the time, while I was there, MIT formed a department to study AI. And, as a student, I read some of the papers and got very excited. Now, this was in the days before social media. So, back then, all the guys in the lab, guys and gals would get together, go onto campus and, perhaps tip a pint back, if you know what I'm saying, and talk about technology. And I expressed, how impressed I was by some of these papers, but, there's a little bit of a rivalry between that group and the group that I was with at Draper. And they were like, oh, Allan, I wouldn't get too involved in that stuff. They're not going to get anywhere for years and years and years, and you're better off staying practical, working on the robots like you're doing. Well, of course, in one way they were right? Because, the work that we were doing had application more or less within a few years, going from, lab to the factory floor. We did a lot of work building tools that could be used like in auto manufacturing. But fast forward now 30, 40 years, and all the stuff that, I was starting to read as a student, has kind of come to fruition. And another thing was when I left the lab, so I interviewed for this job. They had funding to build a machine that would make, clothing, sew it. And again, all these peers, so when you're a student at a place like Draper Lab, you have a lot of people who are mentors, and they kind of take the young students aside and kind of guide them in the right direction. So I interviewed for this job, and they said, don't take it. You're never going to do it. And keep in mind, back then, we were probably working on an Intel 286 computer, which most of the people listening to this won't even remember what that is. But let's just say by today's standards, it was a pretty slow CPU. And they were probably right that no way would I have been able to make any headway on that particular project. And needless to say, I didn't take the job. But again, fast forward 30 years, and I've read in the news that, manufacturers have in fact built machines to do what they were trying to do back in the 1980s. So it's been a fun little history to live through and see this evolve.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And, one of the things I find most interesting about AI is that, as I mentioned before, I was very involved. I was actually the general manager of IBM's Internet division in the mid-90s and the second half of the 90s. And we can all agree the Internet and World Wide Web and related technologies have been phenomenal. I mean, they have been absolutely phenomenal. And right now, AI is going through a period of incredible excitement, not unlike what we lived through in the 90s with the internet. I mean, if you weren't there, that's why we had .coms, the number of startups that went, and so on, and some of them like Amazon and Google became tremendously big, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And with AI, one of the things that was a theme in Rodney's presentation is that, in fact, AI, as he said, started in the mid-1950s, and from the beginning, it kept going through phases when people said, boy, it's on the verge of changing everything, because we will finally be able to have artificial intelligence that can do everything. And at the beginning of his presentation, he went through a series of timelines when people said, we'll change everything, like in the 60s and 70s when top universities said, we got it now. And if some students got PhDs doing very interesting things, and they extrapolated from there, didn't work out. In the 1980s, Japan started what they call the fifth generation computer initiative. And I was there in Tokyo when they launched it in 1980 or 1981. And that was their way of catching up with the West in computers, with the US in particular with computers. And you have to remember the 1980s, Japan was formidable. They almost killed the US car industry by being able to develop very, very high quality, relatively inexpensive cars, Toyotas and Datsuns and so on, compared to Detroit. So a number of people said, okay, so this is now the Japanese age, and they will do now for us in computers what they are doing to us in cars. Well, guess what? The fifth generation computer project fizzled out by the end of the 80s.
And so Rodney gave, before we get to the seven deadly sins, he gave two key reasons why people get it wrong time and time again. The first one is fear of missing out, right? And the second one I think was especially funny. Fear of being a wimpy techno-pessimist and looking stupid later.
Yeah. But I think for sure. But, for example, if you got very excited in, I don't know, the 1880s when Edison first discovered electricity and electrification started to happen and the assembly line, and if you got exuberant about it, people would say, Allan is a bit of a nerd to get so excited about a technology. And similarly, exciting as the internet was, in the end, it was a network. And TCP/IP is a protocol, and the World Wide Web is a lot of software, a lot of technology. So yeah, I mean, it's exciting stuff because of the applications, but there is something, Allan, let me use the word almost romantic about human intelligence. And I mean romantic in the sense of adventure, in the sense of, going on this incredible adventure, trying to develop machines that can do human intelligence. Allan, that's why I don't think there have been too many movies about electricity or the internet, but there have been a lot of movies about AI going back to 2001. And
in all fairness, Irving, there's been a few movies about Nikola Tesla.
yeah, but
I know.
they don't have the appeal or or all these movies where the robot is this, or let me say it another way. There is a beautiful movie, a beautiful woman in the movie, and you learn later this beautiful woman is a robot. So it's an AI that just happens to be. I've seen a lot of robots in factories. They don't look like beautiful women. They don't look like women. They don't look like people. They look like the kinds of machines you would expect to be welding cars.
Well, according to Rodney, that's intentional.
Yes, exactly. So there is something about AI because of it's talking about human intelligence that's particularly captivating to all of us humans. And so that's what Rodney once talked about. And as you said, he his talk was based on an essay he had written on why is it so difficult to get it right about AI. And then he said in his essay, and talked a little bit about it in his talk, here are the 7 deadly sins of predicting the future of AI. In other words, based on all his work in the field, he founded the AI lab at MIT, top roboticists in the world, etc. What are the key reasons why we tend to have trouble predicting the future of AI? Shall we talk
Right.
about that?
Yeah, so just for the sake of the audience, let me just enumerate the 7 deadly sins, right? So
Mhm.
sin number 1 is over and underestimating. Number 2 is indistinguishable from magic. Number 3 is performance versus competence. Number 4 is speed of deployment. Number 5 is Hollywood scenarios. Number 6 is exponentialism. And number 7 is suitcase words. So, as you mentioned, his presentation, he talks about these, but also your blog post does a really nice job of summarizing what these mean.
Because I went and read his essay very carefully, and maybe what we can do, because I find this so interesting. And that, by the way, and it's particularly interesting because it explains why one of the biggest discussions going on with AI now is what is real and what is hype. That's why what is a realistic expectation and what is irrational exuberance. And an irrational exuberance is a more academic way of saying hype, a longer way of saying it. So maybe I can read you what I wrote about each of these 7 deadly sins, and then we can discuss each of them. And
let's do it one by one. Why
let's do it.
don't you start with talking about overestimating and underestimating? I'm going straight from your blog, which may have a different order than what I
No.
read, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, no. So, in fact, there is something in technology that we have called Amaras Law that's been around for a long time. And for a while, people thought this law was uh, coined by Bill Gates, but it turns out it was coined by Dr. Amara, who I believe was in Silicon Valley. And the law says we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run.
Yep.
And I would say, if you look at just about every technology, whether it was the development of steam power at the end of the 19th century, the development of trains, the development of cars, the development of radio and TV, and so on, we underestimated it, but after a few decades is really important. So it turns out we overestimated it in the beginning. That's the hype, and then we underestimated it. What Rodney said about Amara's law and how it applies to AI is that AI has the distinction of having been the shiny new thing and being overestimated again and again in the 1960s, in the 1980s, and he said in his talk to us, and I believe again today. In other words, there is something about AI, unlike these other less human-like technologies, I guess, that has caused us to overestimate it and then the poor technology cannot reach what we expect from it.
Yeah, and I think with LLMs, you and I are going to talk about this in a future episode, so I don't want to, get into it right now, but LLMs have a certain limitation that is not obvious to people when they first start using the LLMs. And I think as a user, as you mentioned, I am a user of ChatGPT and other AI systems, just like most other people. When you first start using them, you start to believe that they have capabilities that are beyond
Right.
a sober analysis
Right.
would really say. And so I think that leads to an overestimation of what you think it can do, but then you come back to reality as you really understand what the technology is doing.
Well, yes, and if I may add, and I think Rodney wrote this, and maybe it's one of the other things, because AI is about intelligence, and again, that's what we humans are, when we see AI behaving in an intelligent way, like your use of ChatGPT, you say, oh my God, well, if it can do that, it can do all the things a human can do. And there is this incredible.
That's his rule number 4, performance versus
Yeah,
competence.
okay. So let's continue. By the way, there is this wonderful essay. I don't know if I have shared it with you, that I think was published in the Wall Street Journal by a UC Berkeley psychologist, and her essay is called "The True Intelligent Machine," and it has a picture of a baby. So just given your granddaughter, I wanted to throw this in. And she was very serious. She's been studying she's a psychologist at Berkeley, and she's been studying how children learn and intelligence and things like that. And her result, her conclusion is there is not even an iota of comparison between the way humans learn, children learn, toddlers learn, and our machines today. You could say,
Irving, at the risk of sounding like a proud granddad, my granddaughter Brianna was over the other day, and my wife is showing her a video of when she was 1 year old on an iPhone, and I was amazed to see that this little baby already knew how to scroll the screen, how to flick it over, how to restart it. Um, you know, who taught her? No, and no one taught her. Her mom posted a picture the other day. I guess she had learned to take a photograph, and she took about 30 photographs and videos within about 3 minutes. And I think the mom created the collage, but yeah, we're not building machines that learn like babies yet.
no, we're far from that.
We're far from it. All right. So performance versus competence. So I mean, just to summarize that one, that is, when you see a human do a task, you tend to believe that you generalize it and think that they can do all these other tasks, and now people do the same thing with machines, but it's not true. Machines are much more narrow in terms of their capability.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, Indistinguishable about magic.
Yeah, well, at that point, he Rodney quoted one of his favorite science fiction writers, Arthur C. Clarke. I don't know if you've heard of Arthur C. Clarke.
I think so.
And he cited what is called Clarke's third law. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And what Brooks said is that this is a problem we all have with imagined future technology. If it is far enough away from the technology we have and understand today, then we don't know its limitations. It becomes indistinguishable from magic. Nothing in the universe is without limit, not even magical future AI. This gets to the point where we're so excited about AI, and then people start extrapolating and they start talking about artificial general intelligence, artificial superintelligence, and they say the only question is it going to come in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And what they don't realize is the level of extrapolation that they are making is absolutely incredible. That's what he's really saying.
Yeah, and I think that we can see this with when ChatGPT came onto the market and the other similar technologies, people who had studied the way the algorithm works, being basically a word prediction type of algorithm. On the one hand, it's amazing that an algorithm constructed in that way can come up with such phenomenally useful results. But on the other hand, I think for those people who use the tool and don't really understand the algorithm, it looks like magic.
Mm-hmm.
Until you start providing very carefully crafted prompts to see what the limitations are, which, a lot of folks have done, and some of it's pretty funny. Yeah, so we talked about, exponentials.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, that is a very interesting point. And in fact, we are very familiar with exponentials in the world of IT, information technologies, because of Moore's law. And Moore's law pretty much was an observation by Moore, one of the founders of Intel in 1960, that he noticed that the advances in chips were doubling every 3 years initially, then every 2 years, because you could cram more transistors into that chip. In other words, semiconductors technology, starting in the late 60s, started advancing exponentially. And that's where Gordon Moore called it Moore's law. And I just finished writing something about it, so it's very fresh in my mind. Everybody said, isn't this fantastic? We don't need to do anything. We just wait for Moore's law to do its thing, for the semiconductor manufacturers to keep doing things better and better and better, and computers get faster and faster and faster and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Well, guess what? Moore's law had a superb 50-year run from the 1960s to roughly, let me say, 2010, thereabout.
Yeah.
However, nothing keeps getting better forever. And Moore's law has been flattening out, and it really has slowed down, and it no longer applies. So Moore's law, so if somebody said, Irving, we can keep getting computers better and better and better because of Moore's law, that's not working. That's why all the advances in getting supercomputers to run AI algorithms like deep learning and generative AI are now relying on graphic processing units, GPUs, which are specialized architectures because they could no longer count on Moore's law. you have to do something very different, and there are things called tensor processing units. Now, so this is a slowdown of Moore's law in semiconductors.
So you're telling me that the exponential is not going to continue such that we reach the singularity in a few years and upload your brain to the cloud?
Well, it's tougher than that, because there is no question that AI with machine learning, with deep learning, and now with generative AI has had exponential advances in the last 15 years. There is no question about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't because of Moore's law. That's a very important thing to say. It was because we got two critical things that we needed for AI. Remember, we said at the beginning that AI is all about having huge amounts of data and being able to analyze and look for patterns in the data. Remember, we said that a while ago.
Absolutely.
Okay. Until 2000, more or less, we didn't have enough digital data. By the way, the data has to be in digital form. Otherwise, a computer cannot analyze it. An algorithm cannot analyze it. Then, starting in the 2000s, we started getting gigantic amounts of digital data. Do you know why we got so much data? It's very interesting.
Yeah, tell me.
The explosive growth of the internet. The internet gave us huge amounts of data, all the stuff we put in the World Wide Web, all the texts and all the messages people send, all the books have been digitalized, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't remember the figure, but if you look at the amount of digital data we now have, it is phenomenal. Phenomenal. For example, I mentioned before that one of the things that was very interesting about machine learning, maybe 5, 6 years ago, maybe longer, is that an AI algorithm was taught how to recognize cats. You know how it was taught to recognize cats? It got shown millions of pictures of cats from people's, I don't know, tweets with cat pictures, or, just people like to take pictures of cats and send them to their friends. So you took all those pictures of cats and you used them to train an algorithm to see how to recognize cats. And that's why it was able to do it. Without all the huge numbers of pictures of cats, it wouldn't have been able to do that. The second thing, besides data that you needed, was very powerful supercomputers, which were particularly specialized in recognizing patterns. And that's where the graphics processing units came in. And GPUs, that's what NVIDIA has building. So Moore's law hasn't helped us because it's already flat. I mean, it was wonderful for 50 years, but it ran out of exponential gas. And now we have more specialized processors, and Google has developed something else called a tensor processing unit. So people are now innovating, not just using transistors, but trying to find what are the key specialized kinds of processors I need to analyze AI things. And now people say, and this is what Rodney was saying, gee, Irving, if we had such advances in machine and deep learning in the last 10, 15 years, aren't we going to continue to have those advances? And his answer was, Irving, just like with Moore's law, exponentials eventually flatten out, and you can expect that to happen. So a lot of the advances in
So to summarize, people forget that exponentials either hit physical constraints in the real world or they actually flatten out, and so they expect this exuberance to continue forever, but it doesn't.
Yeah,
doesn't
and by the
happen.
way, or another thing that happens to exponentials, I don't know if you've been reading about the gigantic costs of the largest supercomputers used in machine learning. And in fact, I read recently Microsoft was working with, the institution in the US government that does nuclear reactors about restarting 3 Mile Island, which was a nuclear reactor that had some problems. So another thing that stops exponentials is money, because the amount of money that is going for the supercomputers and for the electricity they consume used in AI has been going up exponentially, and eventually it makes no business sense, it makes no economic sense. And there have been the Economist had a very good series of articles, I believe it was a week or two ago, about exactly this question that economists are questioning: how can you make money if it's so expensive to train and run AI algorithms? So that's another thing. So now we go to speed of deployment.
Speed of deployment, yeah. So that relates back, like I say, to the story about what they were doing in Draper Lab. They wanted to make a machine make clothing, but of course it took 30 or 40 years to develop that. That I think that people underestimate what it takes. But it was the same thing with electricity. You mentioned
Exactly.
electricity before. I mean, in the beginning, right, we took electricity. The factories were built with pulleys and
Right.
axles, and so the electric motor was only in the center of the factory. It was only later that we started building individual motors and distributing them to the individual machines. That all sounds very simple, but it took decades.
Yeah, it took decades, and Eric Brynjolfsson, who actually was one of the founders of the MIT CIO Symposium at the very beginning, when he was at MIT, the head of the Initiative on the Digital Economy, has written quite a bit about this, that he's analyzed how long it usually takes a technology from the time it leaves the laboratory. So the technology is now out there to its wide deployment in the marketplace. And his conclusion, and he's a really good economist, meaning he deals with real numbers, takes decades. And the more transformational the technology, the longer it takes, because we sometimes forget that part of being transformational is you need new skills, you need new business models, you need new ways of organizing the means of production. You cannot just take an incredible new technology like electricity and throw it into an old factory with pulleys and water wheels and things like that. You had what Henry Ford did. He had to reinvent the whole manufacturing line and develop the assembly line to take advantage of individual motors. And don't forget, you also had to develop transmission lines to get the electricity from the generating plants to the factories all over the place. All that takes time. And
all those problems don't show up in the laboratory. They show up when you try to deploy it. And not only that, when you try to deploy the new technology, there's a lot of what we call long tail problems that
yes,
have to be
exactly.
solved. I think that the self-driving car is a good example of that.
Perfect example. Elon Musk said, I don't know, I remember reading in 2015, 2016, he said, in 2, 3 years, when he first came out with the Tesla, we'd have self-driving cars all over the place. Well, he may still be making those predictions. Almost no one else is, because people are discovering how incredibly complicated it is to get self-driving cars and so on. And moreover, there are going to be regulations. You will have to do all kinds of things. So this is
Oh, and there's unexpected side effects. For
that's
example,
what I mean.
self-driving cars are quite a bit heavier than I think people
Well,
expected. More rubber wear. The tires run out faster.
and right now, for example, there have been experiments in San Francisco with self-driving cars, but those self-driving cars, self-driving taxis, I think Waymo has it. The GM also was in the experiments, but they stopped theirs. But all the Waymo taxis, there is a central control of humans that are monitoring all the taxis, and that every so often they have to get on their own cars and go get the self-driving taxi out of trouble because it got stuck someplace. There was a fire and it got stuck behind a fire truck, etc., etc. You can say, well, that's not a big deal. Well, it's a big deal if you
Sure, because you need a fleet of humans to support the
that,
new technology.
that's what I mean. Eventually, we may surpass that, but eventually it can be a few decades. That's his point here about speed of deployment.
All right. Well, he's got a couple of other ones, the Hollywood scenarios and suitcase words.
Yeah, well, the Hollywood scenarios. First, I mentioned one of them before, which is that in so many AI movies, the robot is a beautiful woman.
Mhm.
I forget this movie with Harrison Ford, famous movie from I think it was came out in 1984, about AI detectives, and I forget what it's called. They had a sequel recently. It's a really, really famous movie.
Okay.
And then that's a Hollywood thing. There are lots of robots, but the robots, as Rodney wrote in another essay that we won't discuss today, have to look as if they were designed to do their job. Your Roomba may not be very pretty because it was designed to clean the goddamn floor. and
Exactly.
and it looks like something that was designed to clean a floor. And that's what a machine should be. But the key Hollywood scenario is when people say, well, what about if in 15 years, all of a sudden, AI becomes super intelligent and start behaving like the AI intelligence in 2001, the movie. Do you remember that movie?
I do remember that movie.
Where I think they called it HAL, and
And they made a fatal mistake, but we don't want to give away the plot.
yeah, and it decided it wanted to take over, kill the human, whatever, and
Well, it had to fulfill its mission.
it had to fulfill its mission. And what Rodney tells us is, first of all, if we get to lots and lots and lots more intelligence, it's going to take time. And it won't just happen that we wake up one day and it's as the Martians landed and now we have super intelligence. It will happen because we'll have one advance after another advance, after another advance, after another advance. And what happens is that as technologies keep advancing, humans learn how to deal with the technologies better and better. And we learn, with cars. We have lots of cars on the road, but we have developed street lights, we have developed semaphores, we have developed rules of the road, regulations, etc., etc., etc. So if and when AI gets more and more intelligence, the probability is very high that society will have learned how to deal and how to best take advantage of such intelligent machines, as opposed to we wake up one day and we are now the slaves of the intelligent machines. Only in Hollywood do you see the intelligent machine coming from the future.
And, and therein lies the root of your optimism with respect to technology.
Yes, therein is that we learn how to work with the technology. We do research, we, run, hopefully the MIT CIO Symposium 10 years from now will be dealing with the then applications of AI, and that will be part of what we keep learning. And part of what we learn is how can we ameliorate those parts of the technology that we don't like so much, like speed limits. Yes, you can kill people 100 miles an hour. You cannot drive 100. I think even in the Autobahn in Germany, I'm not sure you still can drive. There was a time when there were no.
I don't know about that. They drive pretty fast.
Yeah, there were no speed limits. I don't know if they still have no speed limits. I know in the US we have speed limits.
Absolutely. All right. Well, so the last one is suitcase words. I think that this one's in particularly interesting in that, but I see this not only with AI, people have different interpretations of common words like learning.
Yeah, that is what happens, that we use words like, well, let's start with intelligence. Intelligence is a suitcase word, meaning that we're talking about a machine. And in fact, when I told you that artificial intelligence as an academic discipline was created in the mid-1950s, some of the attendants, like Newell and Simon from CMU, top computer scientists of their time, said, why don't we call it complex systems? That is, this is a technology for dealing with very complex systems. The other people say, artificial intelligence is a sexier name that you can use better for marketing purposes. So they called it artificial intelligence. And ever since, a lot of the hype from AI has been because we called it something intelligence. If we had called it something else, then it wouldn't have been this. It's a kind of suitcase name. And there are quite a few others that we use. And then what Brooks said is then the marketing people get a hold of the name AI, and then they start marketing the AI, much as the marketing people got a hold of self-driving cars. And for a while, they said, this is what you should buy. And because in the imagination, the intelligence, the artificial neurons. Sounds like a brain, right? We have our biological neurons. Now you have an artificial neurons. People start confusing what is a machine and what is an extrapolation of the term that applies to humans, how it applies to machines, and then people start writing articles and so on, and we get confused.
I hear you. So listen, you ended your blog post with what Rodney calls my 3 laws of artificial intelligence. So let's just close with those.
Why don't you read this?
I'll give them to you. So the first one is when an AI system performs a task, human observers immediately estimate its general competence in areas that seem related, and usually that estimate is wildly overinflated. And I say we've talked about that. That's exactly what happens. I mean, we see that certainly. I like to think that it's not overly inflated. We're talking about a human, like a 2-year-old, but with machines, certainly it is.
Yes.
The second one that you write is, well, actually, this is from Rodney.
Right.
Most successful AI deployments have a human somewhere in the loop, perhaps the person they are helping, and their intelligence smooths the edges. And actually, this is a really important point.
Yes.
If you talk about, in fact, we were going to talk about different applications. Let's just go to that briefly. I think that in the here and now with the AI that we have, for example, virtual customer service agents are a very popular application, especially the level 1 agent. And I've used these myself with products that I buy. And for simple questions, it's a lot easier than going to the user manual and trying to search for the answer. It can answer in a natural language. And if you, as pointed out, the AI is trained on the data being the corpus of user information that it has available. And so it's able to produce an answer that's usually pretty helpful. And I don't know if you were the person who told me this, but some studies have shown that humans, when they have a question, like to go to an AI first before they interact with the human. They feel self-conscious about wasting the human's time. And so, like to go to an AI. I don't know, it's kind of early days, but my point is
that use of AI you just mentioned, remember, we forget when search first appeared. Can we say that it seemed miraculous that you could go search for anything you wanted? And when it first appeared, there weren't that many websites, there wasn't that much information, it wasn't that good. Don't you use search all the time now?
all the time now.
Now.
But a lot of people are starting to use AI agents as a replacement for search.
Well, or I would, rather than a replacement, I would say search on steroids.
Yeah.
That it's no, but this is very important. The reason that works so well, I think, is because we've gotten used to search. And if you can offer people the next level of search, something much better that even doesn't just give you the websites that you can then have to go to yourself, but it gives you text, what to do. And if you know how to use them well, you can go to the websites. So this, I think one reason that one has worked so well is because it fits nicely into something we've been doing a lot for the last let me say 15, 20 years. I think so. So we've gotten used to it and it works pretty good.
But I think Rodney's point is that a human is in the loop the whole time, right? You're getting the results either from
You're
Google or
getting,
the AI, and you're evaluating which ones are relevant to you.
no question. I think what you're saying is I couldn't possibly do my blogs if I didn't have access to Wikipedia, if I didn't have access to lots of search technologies, but I write the goddamn blog. That helps me do it. And if you said, well, could you have done it before the internet by going to a library? I wouldn't have done it. Are you kidding? That would have been searching. It would have been so much work. I couldn't do it. Whereas here, especially in my post full-time part of my life, I can do that from anywhere. So that technologies have to fit and be very usable by humans. That's really what this says.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I would say another very common application of AI that I find useful is AI generated code. So in other words, if I'm doing an Excel spreadsheet or writing in a program in R or Python and I need a snippet of code, instead of going to the user manual and figuring out how to do it, I can describe what I want
Right.
to the AI. It can generate a snippet of code. I'm embarrassed to say it usually generates a snippet that's better than what I would have written by hand, but nevertheless, I still have to look at it, debug it, test it, sometimes modify it. So, I as a human am still in the loop, but it's definitely a time saver.
No question.
And so, I think all these examples amplify what Rodney is saying is that, right now a human needs to be in loop. By contrast, if you were going to ask an AI to do autonomous legal advice or draft a contract by itself, I don't think people would like that too much.
No.
Or, I don't think anybody wants to go to the doctor and get a completely AI generated diagnosis without a real human, looking at it. So the last one is without carefully boxing in how an AI system is deployed, there is always a long tail of special cases that take decades to discover and fix. And I think we talked about this with the example of the, self-driving cars,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I mean, when did DARPA have the original self-driving challenge? How many years ago was that?
2010, let's say,
2010.
plus minus. They had a number of those.
But back in 2010, when those cars were winning the DARPA challenge, I remember that, I mean, it was like amazing, right? Um, and I remember myself being very optimistic that, oh wow, you know, will we have self-driving cars all over the place by the mid 2020s? Well, here we are. They're not ready yet. So I find myself having been guilty many times of over optimism, but I guess I'm not alone.
No, and you know, I think that since we're getting close to the end, it's very important for us to clarify there is no question that AI is likely to be one of, if not the most important technology of the next several decades. I hate to say of the 21st century because we have a lot of century to go, but I'm pretty comfortable saying of the next 20, 30 years for sure. And what we're doing, and I think what Rodney did so well, and now we are discussing, is it takes time. give it time, do the necessary research, do the necessary market experimentation. I mean, one of the most important things we can do in this symposium, and we have both MIT researchers and CIOs who are living things in the world, is discuss the various experiences, what works for them, what would they like, etc. So both the research in academia and the experimentation in the marketplace are critical, and we'll learn a lot, and the technology will keep improving and getting better and getting safer.
Yeah, so in the spirit of the suitcase word discussion, I just want to add a little clarity to what you said, or at least in my mind. When you use the term AI, I interpreted that as a general broad term for AI as compared to what we'll get from the specific LLM technology, which you and I both know has very clear limitations and by itself is not going to solve the, general intelligence problem. We need to add to that. I don't think we know exactly how that's going to be done, but we're going to talk about that more in a future episode, Irving.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Well, with that, I think we're going to close. I want to thank everybody for joining us for this discussion. This was episode 1 of our online series. Irving and I will be talking again in a couple of weeks, and down the road, we are going to open this up to a live audience, and so stay tuned. See you soon.